Leave if you want. You'll be begging to come back in 2 weeks. He said it the way someone might mention the weather outside. Casual, almost bored. Warren leaned back in his chair, his suit jacket still buttoned, his expression completely flat. I stood there, holding a folder with everything I'd prepared. Numbers, guest feedback, the patterns I'd spent weeks organizing. He hadn't opened it, hadn't even touched it. Then the laughter started. 7 people. 7 people I'd worked alongside for 4 years. People I'd celebrated birthdays with. People whose children I'd asked about. They were all in that room with Warren, and every single one of them started laughing. Not the kind of laughter you share over something funny. This was different. This was the sound of people who'd been waiting for permission to mock someone, and Warren had just given it to them. The woman sitting closest to Warren actually wiped tears from her eyes. She looked at me while she did it, making sure I saw. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. I just looked at Warren and said, "All right." Then I walked out. My name is Lorelei. I spent 4 years building something at Grandshire Hotels that didn't have a name on any organizational chart. I was the head of guest experience, but that title didn't really capture what I did. When I started, Grandshire had 12 properties, small, upscale places that attracted people who wanted something quieter than the big chain hotels but still wanted to feel taken care of. By the time Warren laughed at me, we had 47 properties. I knew the regulars, all of them. Not just their names, but the things that mattered. The man who always requested the same type of pillow because of his back surgery. The woman who drank a specific brand of tea that we didn't normally stock, so I made sure we had it ready when she arrived. The couple who always asked for rooms on higher floors because they liked watching the sunrise. These weren't things written down anywhere. I just remembered. And I taught the people on my team to remember too. That's what made Grandshire different. When you walked into one of our properties, it felt like coming back somewhere you belonged. Not because the buildings were fancier or the rooms were bigger, because someone remembered you. Warren had called me into that meeting to talk about budget cuts. He wanted to reduce my department's funding by 70%. 70. He'd sent me a message the day before with just that number and a meeting time. I spent the entire night preparing. I pulled together everything that showed why what we did mattered. Guest return rates that were almost double the industry average. Satisfaction scores that had climbed every single year. The percentage of people who specifically chose Grandshire over our competitors, and why they said they made that choice. I walked into that meeting ready to explain, ready to negotiate, ready to show him that cutting my budget that much would destroy the one thing that made Grandshire special. He didn't look at any of it. He sat there, surrounded by his leadership team, and he told me he'd already made the decision. The meeting wasn't to discuss anything. It was to inform me. I asked him why he'd bothered bringing me in if he'd already decided. That's when he said it. "Leave if you want. You'll be begging to come back in 2 weeks." The laughter that followed wasn't just humiliating. It was deliberate. Warren had invited those 7 people to watch this happen. They knew what the meeting was about. They'd come there specifically to see how I'd react when he told me. Before I continue further, I want to say thank you for listening to this. I know there are thousands of stories out there, but you chose to listen to mine, and that means something to me. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know. Now, back to what happened next. I didn't cry in that room. I didn't argue. I didn't slam anything or raise my voice. I just said, "All right," and left. I went back to my workspace, picked up my personal belongings, and walked out of the building. It was 2 in the afternoon. I didn't tell anyone on my team what had happened, didn't send messages, didn't make an announcement. I just left. My team found out when they tried to reach me later that day and I didn't respond. Warren sent someone to tell them that my position was being restructured, and I'd decided to pursue other opportunities. That was the official story. I'd decided to leave. The first week was strange. I kept waking up early, my body still programmed to the rhythm I'd kept for 4 years. I'd reach for my device to check the overnight messages from properties in different time zones, then remember I didn't need to do that anymore. The second week, I started getting messages from my old team. They were confused. Things were already falling apart in small ways. A regular guest had arrived at one of the properties, and nobody knew about his wife's severe allergies. Another guest who'd been coming to Grandshire for 3 years had requested her usual room setup and was told they didn't have that information available. I didn't respond to those messages. What could I say? Warren had made his decision. My team would figure things out or they wouldn't. By the third week, 2 people from my team had left Grandshire. Warren replaced them with people who had no experience in hospitality. He gave them my team's responsibilities and told them to handle it. I heard all this through people I'd worked with, not because I was asking. They reached out to me. They wanted me to know what was happening. The 4th week was when things got really bad for Grandshire. It was the start of their busiest season. Summer, families traveling, business groups booking entire floors for retreats, wedding parties reserving blocks of rooms, and nobody at Grandshire remembered how to handle any of it the way we used to. I got a message from someone who still worked there. One of the properties had a family arrive for a reunion, 15 rooms, all booked 6 months in advance. I'd personally worked with the grandmother who organized it. She'd told me about her grandchildren, about specific dietary needs, about how this was the first time the whole family would be together in 5 years. When they arrived, none of that information existed anymore. The grandmother asked about the arrangements we'd discussed, and the person at the front area had no idea what she was talking about. The family left after one night, 15 rooms, empty. The grandmother apparently stood in the lobby and said, "This isn't Grandshire anymore." That wasn't the only incident. Another property had a guest who'd been coming every year for the past decade. He always requested the same type of breakfast, the same newspaper, the same wake-up time. He'd told me once that coming to Grandshire was the only time all year he felt truly relaxed. He checked in and nothing was how he remembered. Nobody knew his preferences. He didn't complain. He just didn't come back the next year. Warren hired 3 different people to try to do what I used to do. I heard about each of them through people who'd stayed in touch with me. The first one lasted 3 weeks. The second one made it to 5 weeks. The third one quit after 2 weeks. None of them could figure out how to recreate what I'd built, because it wasn't about having the right title or the right instructions. It was about genuinely caring about the people who walked through those doors, about remembering them, about making them feel like they mattered. You can't fake that. You can't train someone to care. Either they do or they don't. By the 3rd month, Grandshire's guest return rate had dropped by 38%. People weren't just choosing other hotels. They were writing online about their experiences. Long, detailed posts about how Grandshire had changed, how it used to feel like home and now felt like anywhere else. One post I read said, "Grandshire lost its soul. Warren tried to fix it." I heard through people still at the company that he'd brought in outside consultants, paid them a fortune to analyze what had gone wrong. They gave him reports full of suggestions that meant nothing. Improve customer touchpoints, enhance guest relations protocols, implement personalized service standards. All words that meant nothing, because what Grandshire had lost couldn't be bought or implemented. It was gone. And then something happened that Warren never saw coming. His daughter was getting married. Her name was Colette. I'd met her twice. Once at a company event where she'd been polite but distant, and once 2 years ago when she'd booked the flagship Grandshire property for her engagement party. That second time was different. She'd come to me directly because she wanted everything perfect. She was nervous. She told me how important it was that her fiancé's family feel welcomed, how they came from a different background than hers, and she wanted them to feel comfortable. I spent hours with Colette planning every detail, not just the obvious things like flowers and food, but the small things, making sure there were drinks her future in-laws preferred, setting up the space so it felt intimate instead of formal, arranging for specific music that meant something to her and her fiancé. The engagement party was beautiful. Colette cried when she thanked me afterward. She said I'd made the most important night of her life perfect. So when it came time to plan her wedding, she chose Grandshire. Specifically, she chose the same property where we'd held her engagement party. I found out about this 4 months after I'd left. Someone who still worked there mentioned it to me, said Warren was walking around bragging about how his daughter's wedding would be the biggest event Grandshire had ever hosted. I didn't think much about it at the time. I'd moved on. I was doing other things, staying busy. But then the wedding weekend arrived, and everything Warren had destroyed came back to destroy him. Colette had planned her wedding for 14 months. I heard this from someone who saw the booking details. She'd reserved the entire property for 3 days, Friday through Sunday, rooms for 70 guests, spa treatments for the wedding party, a rehearsal dinner, the ceremony itself, a reception that was supposed to go until midnight. She'd made all these arrangements when I was still at Grandshire, but I'd already left by the time the actual weekend arrived. Nobody at Grandshire had any of the information I'd gathered when Colette and I talked about what she wanted. Those conversations had happened in person. The notes I'd taken were in my own system, organized the way I organized everything. When I left, all of that disappeared. The person who was supposed to handle the wedding weekend had been working at Grandshire for 6 weeks. She'd never planned anything close to this scale. Warren told her to figure it out. Colette arrived on Friday afternoon with her fiancé and his family. The first problem happened within an hour. The rooms weren't ready, not because housekeeping was behind, because nobody had arranged for early check-in, which Colette had specifically requested. The family stood in the lobby for 40 minutes waiting. Then the rooms themselves. Colette had asked for specific flowers in her suite. She'd told me about them during the engagement party planning, her grandmother's favorite flowers. Her grandmother had passed away 8 months before the wedding, and Colette wanted her memory present somehow. The flowers in her suite were generic. Something ordered from whatever supplier gave Grandshire a standard arrangement. Colette didn't say anything to the person who showed her to the suite, but her mother, who was with her, asked about the flowers. The staff member didn't know what she was talking about. That evening was the rehearsal dinner. Colette's future in-laws had dietary restrictions, religious restrictions. I'd spent time learning exactly what they could and couldn't eat because Colette had been so worried about making them comfortable. The kitchen served food they couldn't eat. When Colette's fiancé quietly mentioned this to someone on the staff, they acted like it was the first they'd heard of it. They brought out alternate dishes, but the damage was done. The fiancé's parents sat there barely eating while everyone else enjoyed the meal. Colette smiled through it. She was good at hiding when she was upset, but I would have seen it. The people working that weekend didn't know her. They had no idea. Saturday was worse. The wedding party had spa appointments scheduled for the morning. Colette had been specific about what she wanted, certain treatments, certain products, things that mattered to her. When she and her bridesmaids arrived at the spa, nothing was available. The spa didn't have the treatments booked. They offered alternatives, but they weren't what Colette had asked for, what she'd planned for, what she'd been looking forward to for months. One of her bridesmaids apparently got upset on Colette's behalf, started arguing with the spa manager. Colette had to calm her down. On her wedding day, she had to manage someone else's frustration about things that should have been handled. The ceremony itself went fine. That was happening outside, and Colette had hired her own coordinator for that part. But the reception revealed more cracks. The music wasn't right. Not the volume or the timing. The actual songs. Colette had given Grandshire a list of specific songs that meant something to her and her fiancé. Songs from when they first met. Songs they danced to. Songs that told their story. The person managing the music didn't have that list. They played generic reception music. Colette kept requesting specific songs, and the DJ kept saying he didn't have them queued up. Her fiancé tried to make jokes about it, tried to keep things light, but Colette's smile was getting harder to maintain. Then there was the food timing. The kitchen brought out dishes at the wrong intervals, served dessert before some people had finished their main course. Small chaos that added up. By the end of the night, Colette was exhausted. Not the good kind of exhaustion from celebrating, the kind that comes from trying to hold something together that keeps falling apart. Sunday morning, during the farewell breakfast, Colette's mother said something to Warren. I heard about this conversation from 3 different people, so I know it happened. She told him that the weekend had been a disappointment, that Colette had been looking forward to getting married at Grandshire because of how perfect the engagement party had been. And this wasn't the same experience at all. Warren apparently made excuses, said they'd had some staffing changes, said they were working through growing pains, said it wasn't that bad. Colette's mother looked at him and said, "Your daughter cried in her room last night, on her wedding night, because 1,000 small things went wrong at your hotels. That's when Warren started to understand what he'd done. But he still didn't fully get it. Not yet. The calls to me started that afternoon. Sunday afternoon, while Colette and her new husband were supposed to be enjoying their last few hours before leaving for their honeymoon. My device showed Warren's name. I didn't answer. He called again an hour later. Then again. Then again. I turned off notifications from his number. Over the next week, he called me 17 times. Left messages that got progressively more desperate. The first few were professional, asking if I'd be open to discussing opportunities at Grandshire, saying he'd reconsidered some previous decisions. By the 10th message, his tone had changed. He said there had been some issues during an important event, said he realized they needed someone with my specific experience, asked if we could talk. I deleted every message without listening to the whole thing. Then I started getting calls from other numbers. People from Grandshire's leadership team, the same people who'd laughed in that room. They left messages too, also asking me to call back, to consider returning. I blocked every number. 2 weeks after the wedding, Warren showed up at my building. I was coming back from getting groceries. He was standing outside the entrance. He looked different, older somehow, tired. "I need to talk to you," he said. I shifted the bags in my arms. "No, you don't. Please, just 5 minutes. You had 4 years to talk to me. You chose to laugh instead." I walked past him toward the door. He followed. "Colette won't speak to me," he said. I stopped, turned around. "My daughter won't answer when I call. She won't see me. Her husband's family thinks I humiliated them on purpose. The wedding was supposed to be perfect, and it was a disaster." His voice was shaking. Warren, who'd sat in that meeting so casually while his leadership team mocked me, was standing on the sidewalk looking like he might actually cry. "I need you to come back. Fix this. Fix what's broken." "No." I looked at him for a long moment. "What's broken isn't something I can fix. You made choices. You're living with them. I'll pay you whatever you want. Triple your old salary. Full control over your department. Anything." "You still don't understand?" I said. "This isn't about money. This isn't about title or control. You destroyed something that took years to build because you thought it was expendable. Because you thought I was expendable. I was wrong. Yes, you were. So come back. Prove I was wrong. Show everyone." I shook my head. "I don't need to prove anything. You already did that for me." I went inside. He called after me, but I didn't stop. He kept calling over the next month. I never answered. Eventually, the calls stopped, but the damage to Grandshire kept spreading. Colette told people about her wedding, not in a vindictive way. She was just honest when friends asked how it went. She told them about the small failures, the things that went wrong, how it didn't feel like the Grandshire she remembered. Her friends were all from families with money, the kind of families who held their own events at luxury properties, anniversary parties, birthday celebrations, business retreats. They started choosing other places instead of Grandshire. Within 2 months, Grandshire lost 8 major bookings, events that would have brought in substantial revenue, events that would have led to more bookings from the same social circles. The online posts about Grandshire got worse too. More people writing about how the experience had declined, how it wasn't worth the prices anymore, how they'd found better options elsewhere. Warren tried to stop the bleeding. He hired more consultants, fired people, restructured the whole guest experience department 3 times in 4 months. Nothing worked, because you can't manufacture authenticity. You can't hire someone to care the way I cared. You can't rebuild trust after you've shown people they don't matter to you. 5 months after I walked out of that meeting, I heard through someone still at the company that Warren was selling his stake in Grandshire. Not the whole company, but his controlling share. He was stepping back from running it. The person who told me said Warren looked defeated, said he barely showed up to the final meetings, said he'd aged 10 years in 5 months. I didn't feel victorious hearing that. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired. But then something else happened. Something I hadn't planned. 3 of Grandshire's biggest competitors reached out to me, not to offer me positions like what I'd had before. They wanted me to help them understand what had made Grandshire special, what had made their guests choose us over them. They wanted to learn from what I'd built. I met with each of them. talked about the philosophy behind what I'd done, about remembering people, about making them feel seen, about building something that couldn't be copied because it was rooted in genuine care. Two of them hired me to work with their teams, not as an employee, as someone who came in, taught their people, helped them shift their approach. The third one asked me to help them design their entire guest experience from the ground up. I said yes to all three. Within 6 months, I was working with properties that competed directly with Grandshire, teaching their people everything I'd learned, watching them transform the way they treated their guests. And guests noticed. Some of the regulars who'd left Grandshire started showing up at the properties I was working with. They recognized the approach, the feeling of being remembered, of mattering. One of them told me, "I kept looking for what Grandshire used to be. I finally found it again, just not at Grandshire." Warren's life kept unraveling in ways he never anticipated. About 7 months after I left, I heard he'd stopped attending industry events. The hospitality world isn't that large, especially at the level where people own multiple properties. Everyone talks. Everyone knows everyone else's business. People were talking about Warren. They were talking about how Grandshire had fallen apart, how his own daughter's wedding had been a disaster at his flagship property, how he'd lost the person who'd made his hotel special and couldn't figure out how to rebuild what she'd created. I heard these things because I was at those industry events, the same ones Warren was avoiding. People approached me, asked me questions, wanted to understand what I'd done at Grandshire and how they could apply similar thinking to their own properties. I became known for something Warren had dismissed as expendable, the invisible work of making people feel like they mattered. One evening, I was at a gathering for people who ran luxury properties. Someone I'd never met came up to me and said, "You're the one from Grandshire." Not, "You worked at Grandshire." Not, "You used to be at Grandshire." Just, "You're the one from Grandshire." As if I was the thing worth remembering. Not the company, not the buildings, me. That same night, someone else mentioned that Warren had tried to sell Grandshire entirely, but couldn't find a buyer willing to pay what he thought it was worth. The brand had deteriorated too much. The reputation was damaged. He eventually sold his majority share for significantly less than the company had been valued at 2 years earlier. He kept a small stake, but he wasn't running things anymore. Someone else was making the decisions now. I ran into one of the people who'd been in that room the day Warren laughed at me, the woman who'd wiped tears from her eyes while mocking me. She was at a hotel bar. I didn't seek her out. We just happened to be in the same place. She saw me and her whole body tensed, like she was deciding whether to leave or pretend she hadn't noticed me. I walked over to her. "I remember you," I said. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, quietly, "I'm sorry for that day, for laughing." "Why did you?" Because Warren was laughing. Because everyone else was. Because it felt safer to be part of the group mocking you than to defend you. I nodded. "And now?" "Now I don't work there anymore. Haven't for 3 months. It wasn't the same after you left. Nothing was the same." She looked genuinely regretful. But regret doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't erase the sound of 7 people laughing while Warren told me I'd come crawling back. "I hope you find something better," I said. And I meant it. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because holding on to anger toward her felt pointless. She'd made a choice. She was living with it. The properties I was working with started to see results. Real, measurable changes. Their guest return rates increased. People started writing about their experiences in the same way they used to write about Grandshire. It feels different here, like someone actually cares. One of the properties gave me freedom to train their entire staff, not just the people who interacted directly with guests. Everyone, the housekeepers, the kitchen workers, the maintenance crew, because everyone contributes to how a place feels. I taught them to notice things, to remember, to care about the people walking through their doors as actual human beings, not just sources of income. The property's owner told me 6 months in that they'd never had such positive feedback, that guests were mentioning staff members by name in their reviews, saying things like, "He remembered my coffee order from my last visit," or "She asked about my daughter's graduation that I'd mentioned 3 months ago." These small acts of attention transformed the entire experience, just like they had at Grandshire. But this time, I wasn't building it alone. And this time, the people in charge understood the value of what we were creating. I was working with a third property, helping them design their guest experience from the beginning, when I got a message from Colette, Warren's daughter, the bride whose wedding had fallen apart. She'd somehow found my contact information. Her message was brief. She said she'd heard I was working with other hotels now. She said she wanted to talk to me if I was willing. I almost didn't respond. Getting involved with anything connected to Warren felt like stepping backward. But something about the message felt genuine. She wasn't asking for anything, just to talk. We met at a cafe near where she lived. She arrived exactly on time, looking nervous. "Thank you for meeting me," she said. "I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either." She smiled, but it was sad. My wedding was supposed to be the happiest weekend of my life. It wasn't. Not because of anything big, just because of 1,000 small things that went wrong. I heard, "My father told me later that you'd left, that you were the person who'd made my engagement party so perfect, that you'd been planning to handle the wedding before you left the company." I didn't say anything. "He never told you I specifically requested you for the wedding, did he?" That surprised me. "No. When I booked it, I told them I wanted you handling everything. They said they'd make sure you knew. But I guess after you left, nobody passed that information along. Or maybe they did, and there was just no one there to receive it." She looked down at her drink. "My father destroyed his relationship with me over that weekend. Not because the flowers were wrong or the food timing was off, because he'd built something special and then he dismantled it. And he made me and my husband and his family feel like we didn't matter. I'm sorry you went through that. I'm not telling you this to make you feel bad. I'm telling you because I want you to know that what you built at Grandshire mattered to people. It mattered to me. And watching it fall apart showed me how rare it is to find places that actually care." She paused. "My father knows he ruined everything. He won't say it directly, but I can see it. He looks hollow now, like he's realized too late that some things can't be fixed." "Do you talk to him?" "Sometimes, not often. He apologizes every time. But apologies don't undo what happened." We talked for another hour. She told me about her marriage, about her life, about how that weekend had taught her what to value. She said she and her husband specifically looked for hotels now that felt personal, that felt like someone was paying attention. "You're still creating what you created at Grandshire," she said before we parted. "Just somewhere else. That's not revenge. That's just you being you." I thought about that a lot afterward. About whether what I'd done was revenge or just survival, just rebuilding in a new place. Maybe it was both. A year after I left Grandshire, one of the properties I was working with offered me a partnership, not employment, actual ownership stake. They said I'd fundamentally changed how they thought about their guests, and they wanted me invested in the long-term success. I said yes. Within another 6 months, I had similar arrangements with 2 other properties. I owned pieces of 3 different places, and I was helping them become the kind of hotels people remembered, the kind people returned to, the kind Grandshire used to be. I heard through someone who still kept track of these things that Grandshire was struggling to survive. The new ownership had tried several different approaches to resurrect the brand. Nothing worked. The soul of the place was gone, and you can't resurrect what you killed. Some of the properties closed, others got rebranded entirely. The name Grandshire became associated with decline rather than excellence. Warren apparently tried to start something new, a smaller project, just 2 properties. He wanted to prove he could rebuild, but investors weren't interested. His reputation preceded him, the man who'd destroyed something valuable because he didn't understand its worth. I didn't follow his trajectory obsessively. I just heard things, the way everyone in an industry hears things about people who rise and fall. My life became about building rather than proving. I worked with properties that wanted to create genuine experiences for their guests. I trained people who actually wanted to learn. I invested my energy in places that valued what I brought, and people noticed. Not because I was seeking attention, but because the results spoke for themselves. The properties I worked with became known for the same intangible quality that Grandshire had once possessed. That feeling of being seen, of mattering. I built a life that had nothing to do with Warren or Grandshire. A life where I wasn't trying to convince anyone of my value, because my value was evident in the work itself. Sometimes I think about that day in the meeting, Warren leaning back, the laughter, the assumption that I was replaceable. He was wrong about so many things, but mostly he was wrong about this. I didn't need Grandshire. Grandshire needed me. He learned that, eventually, when it was too late to matter. I never went back, not because I was being stubborn or proud, but because going back would have meant pretending that what happened was acceptable, that people could treat you as disposable, and then expect you to save them when they realize their mistake. Some things can't be fixed. Some relationships can't be repaired. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. Warren wanted me to come back and fix what he'd broken. But what he'd broken wasn't just systems or processes or guest experiences. He'd broken trust. He'd broken respect. He'd broken the foundation of what made Grandshire work. You can't rebuild a foundation while the building is still standing. And I wasn't interested in trying. Instead, I built new foundations, with people who understood their value from the beginning, with properties that wanted to create something meaningful rather than just chase profit. And that, in the end, was better than any revenge I could have planned. I didn't destroy Warren. He destroyed himself. I just refused to save him when the consequences arrived. Thank you for listening to my story. If something in here resonated with you, if you've ever felt dismissed or undervalued and wondered whether walking away was the right choice, I hope this helped. Leave a like if this story meant something to you. Share your own experiences in the comments. And if you want to hear more stories like this, about people who chose themselves when others chose to dismiss them, subscribe. Your support means more than you know.